Hey listeners, welcome to Skoo Universe. I'm Scott, and today we're talking about Chernobyl. In 1986, Chernobyl was the site of the world's worst nuclear accident. One of the power plant's nuclear reactors experienced meltdown and exploded. A massive amount of deadly radiation was released into the environment. The site remains dangerous to this day. And recently, with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Chernobyl was in the news once again. During the first week of the invasion, Russian forces, together with support from Belarus, moved into Ukraine and took control of the remains of the damaged nuclear plant and the surrounding area.
俄军入侵乌克兰后，攻占车诺比核能站，搞得人心惶惶。你有没有发现，其实这几年现实生活比电影越演越夸张？今天 Scott 带我们回到34年前的 Chernobyl。
The official name of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant is the Vladimir Lenin nuclear power plant. Vladimir Lenin was a Russian revolutionary and politician. He served as the first leader of Soviet Russia and the Soviet Union from 1917 to 1924. The site chosen for the power plant is 10 miles from the Ukraine-Belarus border, near the small town of Chernobyl. Chernobyl is the Ukrainian name for a type of plant called wormwood. Well, this poisonous plant is used as an ingredient in absinthe and other alcoholic beverages. The etymology of this word goes back to the Proto-Slavic language. Proto-Slavic is the shared source of Russian, Ukrainian, Czech, and many other Eastern European languages. This is very similar to the way in which Latin evolved into the various Romance languages, such as Spanish, Italian, and French. In Proto-Slavic, Chernobyl translates to black grass or black stalk, which distinguishes this variety of wormwood from others with lighter colored stems.
Chernobyl 核能厂的官方名称其实是 Vladimir Lenin Nuclear Power Plant。Vladimir Lenin 是苏联的第一个领袖，执政6年。Chernobyl 其实原本是一种有毒植物的名称，英文叫做 wormwood， 可以来酿制苦艾酒 Absinthe。以原学 etymology 来说， Chernobyl 可以追溯到原始斯拉夫语，不论是俄语、乌克兰语，或是很多其他东欧的语言，其实都是从原始斯拉夫语演变来的。那 Chernobyl 可以直译成黑草或是黑根。
The Chernobyl nuclear power plant sits about 60 miles north of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. In 1970, when construction began on the nuclear power plant, Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union. In addition to the power plant, an entire town was constructed. This town, called Pripyat, was built for the plant's workers and their families. By the time of the disaster in 1986, the city of Pripyat was home to nearly 50,000 people. The first of Chernobyl's nuclear reactors was completed in 1977, and the power plant officially became active. A second reactor was completed in 1978, a third in 1981, and reactor number 4 in 1983. At the time of the disaster in 1986, 2 more reactors, 5 and 6, were under construction. The plan for the site included a further 6 reactors to be built by 2010. Which would have brought the total to 12. However, everything changed on April 26, 1986.
Chernobyl 核能厂是从1970年开始施工，一直到发生意外的那一年，也就是1986年，总共完成了4个 nuclear reactors 反应炉，另外2个当时正在施工中。按照原本计划走的话，最后总共要盖12个反应炉。
The events that led to the accident began with an ill-fated safety test. Nuclear fission generates a lot of heat, and a constant flow of water is required to provide the necessary cooling. A worst-case scenario was considered to be a loss of power at the plant and failure of an emergency cooling tube. Backup generators, powered by diesel fuel, needed over a minute to begin powering the normal cooling system. But if the emergency cooling tube failed at the same time, the heat would build up to dangerous levels and possibly result in fire and explosion. Engineers and other experts had been looking for a way to maintain cooling in this worst-case scenario long enough for the diesel generators to power up. The test being run on this day in April 1986 was testing one such technique. The same test had been run at least 3 previous times, as far back as 1983, all with unsatisfactory results.
意外的发生其实是因为一场倒霉的安全测试，这里 Scott 用的形容词是 ill-fated, an ill-fated safety test. 安全测试的目的是要预演最糟状况 the worst case scenario， 在紧急停机的60秒内切换供应冷却系统的电力，避免炉心爆炸。那这次意外发生前其实已经测试失败3次了。
In order to run the test, one of the nuclear reactors would be used to simulate the worst-case scenario circumstances. The emergency cooling would be shut down, and the reactor would undergo a controlled power down, simulating a loss of power. The test was to be conducted during the day using reactor number 4. Extra workers and nuclear experts were on hand to oversee the test. 15 minutes before the test was to begin, a nearby power station went offline. Controllers for the Kiev electrical grid contacted Chernobyl and asked that the reactor not be powered down until the other power station's situation could be resolved. Hours went by. Finally, 10 hours later, near midnight, Chernobyl was given the go-ahead. However, by then, the day shift was long gone. The evening crew was also preparing to leave, and the test was handed over to the night shift. The few workers present on the night shift had not prepared to perform the test, but the decision was made to go ahead anyway.
当天原本预计在白天进行测验，但是测试前的15分钟 Kiev 的发电厂却通知他们 Kiev 那边出了问题，所以请他们延迟测试。可以说是这一天的连锁效应酿造了这场悲剧。等待10个小时后，终于接到可测试通知，但是已经是大半夜了。虽然有经验的技术人员都已经下班了，但是值班主任怕影响进度，还是坚持照计划进行4号反应炉的安全测试。
During the test, design flaws in the reactor and with the test put the reactor into a dangerous, unstable state. Combined with these flaws, human error led to vital equipment failure during the test. The result was a series of explosions and a runaway nuclear reaction known as a core meltdown. The shift supervisor and the senior control engineer, who were running the test that night, both hurried to the damaged reactor. They tried to open valves by hand so that water could be pumped in to fight the fires and to continue cooling the nuclear material. The 2 men were found later by other workers. They were suffering from severe radiation sickness. The men were rushed to the hospital, but both were dead within 3 weeks. They died before they could be properly questioned by authorities regarding their decisions leading to the disaster.
因为苏联 RBKM 反应炉设计上的缺陷，他们只有单一的防护层，没有安全壳，加上夜班人员缺乏经验，应变能力不足，最后造成核心熔毁 core meltdown。那值班主任和资深控管工程师在危机时刻都有尝试救火，最后2人因辐射中毒3个礼拜后在医院宣告死亡。
Firemen from the surrounding area arrived quickly to fight the fires at the damaged reactor. Unfortunately, these men were not made aware of the nature of the disaster or the dangers involved. They wore no protective gear. As they heroically fought the flames, they were exposed to deadly amounts of radiation. Many more men from among these firefighters were to die in the following weeks and months from radiation-related sickness. Teams were brought in to clean up and contain the nuclear debris. These teams would become known as liquidators. They, too, often worked with inadequate gear, and many would suffer health consequences from the radiation. The city of Pripyat, nearly 50,000 people, was entirely evacuated within 2 days. Residents left with whatever they could carry and never returned to their homes. Eventually, the evacuation would extend to over 100,000 people. The empty region would be known as the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone.
之后来救火的消防人员并没有被告知失火场地的辐射危险性，后来也因为中毒几周内相继过世。周遭的居民约10万人也必须撤离家园，这个地区就是所谓的 Chernobyl Exclusion Zone 车诺比隔离区。
The open-air reactor fire, which burned after the initial explosions, spewed radioactive particles into the air for at least 9 days. This radiation spread far and wide. Increased radioactivity discovered in Sweden and Finland alerted the world to the fact that a nuclear disaster had occurred. The entire evacuation of the city of Pripyat had occurred before Soviet authorities acknowledged that the disaster had indeed taken place. Due to the possibility of radioactive particles being spread by wind, rain, and animals, a plan was devised to seal up the damaged reactor. By December of 1986, a concrete and steel structure called the sarcophagus was erected, completely enclosing the reactor and the remaining radioactive material. The sarcophagus also shielded workers who remained on site manning the power plant's other 3 reactors.
这次的核能意外也影响了边境外的国家，瑞典和芬兰分别都检测到可疑的放射增生。苏联最后只好承认意外的发生。为了防止辐射扩散，苏联政府在4号反应炉的周围盖了一道防护墙，英文他们叫做 sarcophagus。这个字其实一般是埃及贵族石棺的意思哦。
Unbelievably, the plant continued to operate. The Soviet Union couldn't afford to shut the plant down.After the fall of the Soviet Union, Chernobyl fell under the control of Ukrainian authorities. Still, the plant continued to operate. Reactor number 2 was shut down in 1991 after a fire. In 1996, reactor number 1 was shut down. And finally, in the year 2000, the final reactor number 3 was shut down and the nuclear power plant ceased operations. A new containment structure was designed to replace the hastily built sarcophagus. Started in 2010 and finished in 2019, the new safe confinement, or NSC, is a megastructure that completely encloses the old reactor number 4 and the original sarcophagus. Its primary goal is to confine the radioactive remains for the next 100 years. Its design also allows further cleanup and study of the debris within.
随着反应炉一一关闭，2011年，俄国政府和国际组织合作在石棺外又加盖了一道安全围堵体 New Safe Confinement， 于2019年完工。NSC 是接下来100年的保护墙。真是前人闯的祸，后人擦屁股。其实人生就是擦不完的屁股呗。Thanks for tuning in. Here at School Universe, we will continue to do our best to clean up the world's mess, and we encourage you to do the same.Never give up. Let us learn what we can from our mistakes and evolve to always do better.